The blade was already in my hand when the Queen turned to face me, and for the first time in 300 years of quiet work, I felt something close to doubt. I had crossed 17 sealed corridors, silenced 4 sensor grids, and slipped through 2 chambers, built to end any intruder who did not know the truth of this palace. I knew the truth. I had studied it for 4 months. The real chamber was not the first room, or the 5th, or the 12th. It was the 18th, hidden behind a wall of false stone, and I was standing in it now with my target 6 steps away, and no alarm sounding anywhere in the building. She did not scream. She only looked at me the way someone looks at a weather report they already expected. "You took longer than the last one," she said. I did not answer. I never spoke to a target before the work was finished. Words were a comfort I had trained out of myself long ago, because comfort slows the hand, and a slow hand is a wasted contract. I raised the blade, a length of collapsed star metal that no shield in the known systems could turn aside, and stepped forward. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow, unbothered, the steps of someone who had never once believed they needed to hurry. I turned, ready to remove whatever obstacle had wandered into my path, and found a man standing in the archway with his arms folded, watching me the way a person watches a show they have already seen the ending of. He wore a plain guard's coat, nothing marked, nothing armored, no weapon at his side. His face was calm in a way that did not match the moment at all, and that mismatch was the first thing that told me something about this night was not what it seemed. "You disabled 4 sensor grids," he said, "walked through 2 rooms built to end anyone who breathes wrong, and cracked a lock system our engineers spent 11 years designing." He tilted his head. That part was genuinely impressive. I said nothing. A witness changed nothing about the outcome. A witness simply became a second task. "You understand," I said, "that you cannot stop what happens next." He smiled. I have seen every kind of smile a frightened creature makes in the last moment before an ending. The stretched one, worn like a mask that does not fit. The shaking one, offered as a bargain to a god that is not listening. This was not that. This was the smile of a man who had watched the same trick fail to impress him more times than he could count. "Here's the funny part," he said, stepping forward with no urgency at all. "Every visitor the compact sends thinks exactly what you're thinking right now, that she's trapped, that I'm just decoration standing near a doorway, that this will be quick." He took another step, and every time, I get to watch the moment they realize they walked into the one room in this palace that isn't guarded by machines. My instincts told me to finish the work while the target was still within reach, still unguarded by anything visible, still achievable in a single motion. But the room had changed shape without my noticing. The man had placed himself, without seeming to try, directly between me and every angle that led to her. Every single one. "You're wondering how I got here so fast," he said, reading the stillness in my shoulders the way I usually read intent in someone else's. "Simple answer. I never left. I was standing in this room before you finished walking through the 12th chamber. I watched you choose the 18th. I let you get this close because I wanted to see how good you actually were." "That is not possible," I said, and heard, for the first time in 3 centuries, a small crack in my own voice. The building logs showed this room empty. "Right," he said, smiling wider, the way someone smiles at a puzzle finally solved. "Because I don't register on your instruments. About 60 years ago, your people figured out that every detection system built by the compact reads heat and pulse and the particular hum that your kind gives off when you move through a space. My kind doesn't give off the same signal. To your sensors, I'm just background, a rounding error your engineers optimized away before your ship ever left home." I understood then, with the sharp clarity that only comes seconds before a mistake becomes permanent, that I had not walked into a poorly guarded room. I had walked into a trap made entirely from my own assumptions. "She was never unguarded," he said, and the lightness left his voice, replaced by something quiet and certain. "She just never needed the kind of guard your instruments know how to look for." I moved. I am fast. Faster than anything the compact has fielded in a generation. Fast enough that I have ended conflicts before either side finished raising their weapons. I closed the distance to the Queen in a fraction of a second that should not have given anyone time to react. He was already there. Not blocking with force, not meeting me with some hidden device. He was simply standing where the path needed to be closed, the way a wall exists where a door has decided not to be. And when my blade met his raised arm, it stopped, as if it had struck the hull of a transport ship. Surprise is rare for me. This was surprise. 300 years, he said gently, his hand closing around my wrist without so much as a tremor. And nobody at the compact ever asked why my people don't carry a threat rating in your files. Everyone assumed it was because we were slow to develop. His smile had not faded once through any of this. It's because whoever wrote those files never got close enough to update them. The Queen had not moved from the balcony rail. She had not needed to. Take her whole if you can, Callan, she said, sounding more tired than afraid. The questioners do hate it when there's nothing left to ask. No promises, he said, and the light in his eyes did not soften at all. For a moment, everything in me refused the truth of what was happening. 3 centuries of work had taught me that fear moves in predictable shapes, that every creature under pressure eventually breaks into the same handful of patterns. This man showed none of them. His pulse, when I finally focused on it, was steady as a held note. His breathing had not changed once since he first stepped into the archway. I twisted free of his grip, a maneuver that had never failed me against anything with a spine, and put distance between us with a burst of speed that should have carried me through the far door before he finished blinking. He was standing at the far door, not running, not chasing, simply there, arms still loosely at his sides, watching me arrive at the exit he had somehow already claimed. "You're doing the math wrong," he said. "You keep calculating distance and time like they're the only variables that matter. They're not the only ones in this room." I turned instead toward the balcony, thinking to take the Queen through open air, over the edge, down into the gardens where my extraction point waited. The moment I turned, a second figure rose from where she had been kneeling among the potted trees along the balcony rail, a young woman in the same plain coat, a length of cord already looped loosely between her hands like she had been idly practicing a knot the entire time I had been in the room. "Evening," she said, as if we had simply crossed paths in a hallway. "I'm Priya. I was starting to think you weren't coming." 2 of them, positioned before I ever entered the chamber, neither read by the instruments I had trusted with my life for 300 years. I ran the numbers again, faster this time, accounting for everything I now understood about how their bodies moved through space unseen by compact technology. If 2 guards stood invisible to my sensors, then the entire palace I believed I had mapped in careful silence over 4 months might have been full of shapes I never once detected. The thought arrived at the same moment the truth of it did. Doors along the corridor behind me opened, quiet, unhurried, and figures stepped out of rooms I had marked as empty on every scan I ever ran. A tall man with graying hair leaned against a support column near the stairwell. A woman with short dark hair sat casually on the edge of a fountain I had walked past twice without a flicker of warning. A pair of younger guards stood near the garden entrance, talking softly to each other, as though none of this concerned them at all. None of them had weapons drawn, none of them moved with urgency. They simply existed in spaces I had been trained to trust as clear, and every one of them turned to look at me at exactly the same moment, as if some signal had passed between them that no instrument in my possession could ever hope to catch. "The whole staff," I said, more to myself than to anyone in the room. "The whole palace." "Most of it," Callan said behind me. "Not all. We're not showing off. We just don't like surprises either." I felt, for the first time since I accepted this contract, the particular cold that comes from realizing the ground beneath a plan has quietly become something else entirely. Every calculation I had trusted, every months of careful study, had been built on a picture of this world that the world itself had never actually shown me. I had been shown a story, a convenient, comfortable story, crafted and maintained by an entire species that understood exactly how the rest of the galaxy chose to see them. "Why?" I asked, and the word came out rougher than I intended. "Would an entire people choose to be seen as weak?" Callan considered the question with the same unhurried patience he had shown from the beginning. "Because everyone underestimates what they've already decided isn't dangerous," he said. "For a long time, that was survival. Now it's just useful. You spent 4 months studying our doors, and our sensor grids, and our decoy rooms, and you never once spent an hour wondering why every report ever written about us reads the same way. Slow, simple, harmless. Nobody questions a story that flatters their own side. And the Queen, I said, she let this happen. She stood at that rail, knowing exactly what I would find when I arrived. She trusted her people, he said. That's not the same as being trapped. You mistook patience for weakness. That mistake has a long history around here. I looked past him, toward the Queen, who watched the exchange with an expression that held no fear at all, only a kind of weary familiarity, the look of someone who had sat through this exact conversation more times than she cared to count. How many, I asked her directly, have come before me? Enough that I stopped counting the names, she said. I remember the ones who were interesting. You're one of the interesting ones. Most give up the moment they realize the room has changed around them. You're still trying to find a way through. She was right. Even now, with every exit lined by calm, unhurried figures who had already proven themselves faster and steadier than any target I had ever studied, some old and stubborn part of my training refused to accept that the work was finished. I searched the room again, cataloging angles, weighing the one narrow gap between the woman named Priya and the column where the older man leaned, calculating whether speed alone might still carry me through before any of them could close the distance. You're still counting exits, Callan said, not unkindly. I get it. 300 years of habit doesn't switch off because the numbers stopped working. But I want you to actually look at this room instead of measuring it. Something in his tone made me pause, and for the first time since stepping into the false 18th chamber, I did what he asked. I looked, rather than calculated. The guards around the room were not tense. None of them stood ready for a fight in the way I understood readiness. Weight forward, breath held, muscles coiled for the first motion. They stood the way people stand, while waiting for a kettle to finish, mildly interested, utterly unworried. It was not the posture of soldiers preparing to meet a threat. It was the posture of people who had already decided the outcome and were simply waiting for me to arrive at the same conclusion. You've done this before, I said slowly, not just guarded against it. You've walked others through exactly this moment. More times than I'd like, Priya said from the balcony, still turning the cord loosely between her fingers. It's not really about catching you. It's about giving you the chance to stop before this becomes something neither of us enjoys. I thought of my handlers back among the compact fleets, of the reports I would need to send if I somehow found a way out of this chamber. Reports that would describe a species entirely mismeasured by every intelligence file the compact had ever compiled. I thought of the 4 months I had spent studying doors and locks and sensor patterns, certain I had found every weakness this palace had to offer, when the actual weakness had been in the very reports that sent me here in the first place. What happens, I asked, if I choose not to stop? Callan's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes settled, the way water settles once a stone has finally stopped moving through it. Then we finish this the slow way, he said. Nobody in this room wants that. Least of all you, once you actually think it through. You've spent 3 centuries being the reason other people's plans fell apart. Tonight, you get to decide whether you're willing to let someone else's plan work instead. There was no threat in his voice, no attempt to frighten me into surrender, and somehow that made the words land harder than any raised blade could have. I had spent 300 years learning to read intent in the smallest details, and every detail in that room told me the same thing. These people were not afraid of what happened next. They were simply waiting to see what I would choose to do with that fact. I lowered the blade. It was not surrender in the way I understood the word from 3 centuries of contracts and endings. It was something closer to arithmetic finally resolving itself, the last piece of a calculation sliding into place after refusing to fit for longer than it should have. The room did not celebrate. Nobody moved to congratulate themselves on a victory. Callan simply nodded once, the way a person nods when a difficult negotiation finally reaches its natural conclusion, and stepped forward to take the blade from my hand with the same unhurried calm he had carried since the very first moment I saw him. Smart, he said, genuinely. Most don't get there this fast. You said others came before me, I said. What became of them? Some went home with a very different report than the one they arrived expecting to write. he said. A few decided they'd rather work for us than against us, once they understood what they'd actually been sent to fight. One or two are still deciding. It isn't my place to say which path suits you. That part's yours to work out. The Queen finally left the rail and crossed the room toward us, her silver robes catching the low light in a way that felt, for the first time that night, less like a performance and more like an ordinary woman walking across an ordinary floor. You'll be given a choice tomorrow, she said. Tonight, you'll simply rest. Nobody here intends you harm, provided you don't give them a reason to reconsider that. I studied her face, searching for the fear I had expected to find there 4 months of planning ago, and found instead something closer to curiosity, as if she were genuinely interested in which choice I might make once the shock of tonight had settled. Why tell me any of this? I asked. The instruments, the staff, the whole shape of tonight. You could have simply ended the matter and sent nothing back to the compact at all. Because silence teaches your people nothing, she said. And because every report you might send home, however it reads, chips away at the same convenient story that got you sent here in the first place. Sooner or later, enough of you will stop believing the old files, and then maybe fewer of you end up standing in rooms like this one. I thought about that for a long moment, turning the star-forged blade over in memory, now that it no longer sat in my hand, thinking of the 4 months I had spent so certain of my own understanding of this world, and the single hour tonight that had unmade nearly all of it. I will need time, I said finally, to decide what kind of report this becomes. Take it, Callan said, already turning toward the corridor, his posture as unhurried in victory as it had been in the moment before I ever knew his name. Nobody in this palace is in any rush to see you leave before you've actually understood what you walked into. As they led me from the chamber, past guards who had never once appeared on any scan I trusted with my life, I found myself doing something I had not done in 300 years, of quiet, careful work. I found myself wondering, for the very first time, how many other stories I had accepted as fact simply because nobody had ever stood close enough and calm enough to prove them wrong.